So I want to welcome Chase Twichell tonight. Chase is calling in from Saratoga Springs, right? Saratoga Springs in northern New York. And she's a poet, and she's a Zen-inspired poet. She's got 8 books of poetry out, and she was a teacher of poetry for many years at institutions like Princeton University, University of Alabama, at Hamilton College. And she also founded and ran for 10 years a publishing house, a house that published poems and poetry. And it was called the Oswald Press, and she sold that to Copper Canyon. And so she's also received Guggenheim Fellowship, American Academy of Arts and Letters, and etc. And since 1996, she's been a member of the Mountains and Rivers Zen group based in Mount Tremper, I believe, in New York. We'll hear more about that, right? So welcome, Chase. I want to ask you also, please let it be known that at the end of this first hour, you can leave chat questions, and we'll try to pick those up.
Yeah, and I hope you'll do that because it's fun to answer them.
Yeah, absolutely. And so, Chase, how did you get into poetry? I think you've been writing poems since you were a tiny girl, right?
Well, actually, I was obsessed with painting when I was a kid. So much so that by the time I got out of 8th grade and went away to boarding school, my parents decided that my obsession with painting was dangerous to my social life. So they forbid me to take art classes in school. What parent does that to their child? And so I got my revenge by starting to write poems. That was how I began. So I was about 14 when I started writing instead of painting.
And what were your first poems about? What'd you write about as a 14-year-old?
Who knows? It would be scary to go back and read them. I think at that point I was probably just expressing my emotions, mostly my rage at not being able to paint. And I was reading a lot, though. We had it was a very small school, but it had a really good poetry library, because there was a company that came in every week and filled in the blanks of the little poetry section. And you could take whatever books you wanted and you just signed them out and put your name in a shoebox, and they would charge your parents. So I did a lot of reading, and I read everything from Keats to Lawrence Ferlinghetti and everything in between. I just, to the detriment of my grades, I gobbled up poetry.
And you then became interested in Zen as a young adult. I think you'd already graduated
from college. I was
after college.
Well, in college, I was interested in Eastern religions, and I took some courses. And then I remember that the transcendental meditation people came to town, and they did a presentation on campus, and you could sign up. It was really expensive. I think it was $250, and this is late 60s. And then we would get your private secret mantra. And I thought, I don't think I should have to pay for a mantra, whatever a mantra is. So I declined, but a lot of my friends did it and were talking it up. So I got interested in meditation, and I tried doing it myself, having not a clue what I was doing. But I tried and then gave up. And then years later, it was how many years later? The early 90s. So 25 years later or so, I was in Princeton, and I just started thinking about meditating. I was under a lot of stress, and I thought, well, I'm going to check this out. And so I went down in the basement and dragged out all my old books, including all the old Buddhism books, and read about it, and was just taken by the whole idea of Zazen. And I read whatever I could, and then I decided I needed a teacher. So I picked about, a half dozen places in the Northeast. And my idea was to go on a kind of pilgrimage and go to each one and spend a little time and then decide which place was the best fit for me. And the first place I went to was Zen Mountain Monastery in upstate New York, which is only a couple of hours from where I am. And I walked in the door and that was it. I knew I was home. I could tell instantly. Nothing about it stopped me. And I never did end up going to any of the other places, except years later when I went with a friend or something, but not with the intention of ever going there as a student.
Mm-hmm.
So I was lucky.
Nice. Well, let's read a poem. Can we start with Snakeskin?
Snakeskin. Snakeskin. When I lie on the floor with a dog and half capture her so I can brush her, check her ears and eyes, her nose and teeth and tongue, and slicken her feathery, pale belly with a cat brush, I'm not sure where I've been when I come back. Something goes and comes back. Sentience, consciousness, soul, spirit. For lack of better words, I call it mind. It has no name for itself. When I was a young snake and sloughed off my first skin, reborn a quicksilver rivulet in the grass, my body was a question answered by the crisp gray lace it left behind. Things do not come in and out of being in words. There are no words until after.
I love that. I love that quality of there are no words. You know, the Tao Te Ching, the first lines, you know, the Tao that can be spoken of is not the true Tao, and the word that can be said is not the true word.
It reminds me of Paul Valéry, the French poet, saying, "Seeing begins when you forget the name of the thing you are seeing."
Yeah, yeah. That's great. And for lack of better words, I call it mind, you know, and that, of course, that's Zen, right? So you came in 1996, the Mountain and Rivers Order, and you...
Actually, 96,
95.
Normal student.
Okay. And you studied with John Daido Loori, is that right? And
I did.
I drove in there with my wife in the parking lot. We drove around and they were having a retreat. So we drove out and I've never seen it. Can you describe Mount Tremper for us?
Well, Mount Tremper is kind of nowheresville. There's not really even a town. They have a post office and that's about it. And so it's really in the country. It's in the Catskills in the middle of a preserved area. So it's really wild and remote and very beautiful. And the monastery originally was a Lutheran church, a big stone Lutheran church. And then I think it became a Lutheran summer camp for a while, or it had some middle life before John Daido Loori found it and bought it and decided to start what he referred to as a Zen arts center there. And so for a long time, there was a big crucifix on the end of the building. I think they've taken it down now. But it had a Lutheran vibe definitely to it. And when I first started going there, it was pretty bare bones. It was pretty simple. There was the one main building and then one smaller building that I think had once been a caretaker's house or something like that, which was the offices and the little store where you could buy a zafu and so forth, and a couple of rooms for students. And now it's really different. They've really added buildings. They have a big center. It's a big Dharma house where they have presentations, and it's pretty wonderful. And they have a studio there where all the sewing goes on, and another studio where people can teach motion, body movement, dance, etc. And the grounds are beautiful. And my favorite part of it is a huge garden, which they grow all their own vegetables, all their own produce, and it's quite wonderful.
So, is it largely a monastic order with some residency, or can lay people come in just visit over short periods? Or?
Well, it's open on Sundays for anybody who wants to come to Sunday service and then stay for lunch, which many people do. And it's back when I was first a student, it was very rigorously planned out so that every weekend something was going on. If they weren't in session, then there was a workshop of some kind or other, or sometimes 2 or 3 at a time. And they might be in things like archery, art, study of the sutras, sometimes
all kinds of activities and classes.
Yeah. And it was really busy all the time. And now it's much less so. There's a session, a week-long session every month, and there are maybe 1 or 2 other workshops or events the rest of the month. And so it's much more monastic now and less of a school, I would say, than it used to. And I prefer it this way. I like the quiet.
The quiet. Nice. How about Glimpse? Could we read another poem?
Sure. Glimpse. This is a poem from a book called The Snow Watcher, which is about my very early days of Zen and what the experience was like of encountering it for the first time. And I just want to say, I love the title, The Snow Watcher, and I stole it from a children's poem. I love kids' poems, and this was a 1-line poem. I pushed through a crowd of snow watchers. That's the whole poem. I thought it was great. Okay, Glimpse. It was as if a window suddenly blew open, and the sky outside the mind came flooding in. My childhood shriveled to a close. Thread of smoke that rose and touched a cloud, or the cloud's replica adrift on the slow river of thinking, and disappeared inside it. In that dark water, a new lily was opening, sky white out of the muck. It was only a glimpse, quick, like a bird ruffling. But I saw the flower's beautiful, stark shape, an artichoke brightened from within by the moon. A path lay shadowy under my feet, and I followed it.
A path lay shadowy under my feet, and I followed it. Also, in that dark water, a new lily was opening, sky white out of the muck. Yeah, that's so great. So, are you I don't know him. I've never met him, but Shugen Arnold, I think, is your
yes. He's my current teacher.
And I think he's headed. Do you work on koans or shikantaza or both?
I do shikantaza.
Okay.
In fact, there was a quote that you put on the announcement for this evening that quoted me saying something about a koan. And that quote has come back to haunt me so many times. I've never worked on koans. I've always done shikantaza. But it was taken out of context in the interview I did. I think it was an interview in Tricycle. And so many people have come up to me and said, oh, tell me, what about koans? And I have to say, I don't know anything about it. Sorry.
Yeah. Well, good. We get some feel of koans in your poetry, I think.
Well, I still think about them all the time. I've just never worked on them formally.
Yeah. Well, the water's fine. Jump in, Things as it is. Now that came from Shunryu Suzuki, and I guess
David Chadwick.
Yeah, David Chadwick is a longtime friend of ours, and he's a luminary, as you are now. You are a luminary, and so David, I guess he's probably the primary biographer of Shunryu Suzuki, and I guess he was talking to Suzuki Roshi one time. He says, "Don't you mean things as they are?"
He was transcribing a talk.
Yeah.
And, he came across the phrase "things as it is," and he said, "Roshi, I think you've got this wrong here. It's supposed to be things as they are." And Suzuki Roshi said, "No, what I meant was things as it is." which I thought was great.
Yeah, yeah. I really come to appreciate Suzuki Roshi more and more these past years. Just rereading Beginner's Mind and getting to know David and Cuke.com,
Yeah,
CUKE.com is his database of all of Shinryu Suzuki's material. So
a lot of
he was
the
a
times
fabulous,
when
fabulous
I
teacher.
quote something, it's usually Suzuki Roshi. One of my favorites is someone came to him very upset and said, "Why is there so much suffering in the world? There's illness and death and war and all these horrible things going on. Why is there so much suffering?" And he said, "No reason,"
Yeah,
which is a
yeah.
very wise answer.
The why of it. Yeah. And beginner's mind,
Hmm.
expert has very few opportunities. A beginner has many. Yeah. So things as it is.
Here it is, things as it is. Last night, my hand began writing in the hand of some future me, as if a branch in wind had scribbled on freshly fallen snow. In the dark, coyotes called back and forth in the bird silence. I put down the pen and went outside, stood listening to wind in snow's translation. Wild dogs, teach me a few of your words before I die.
Yeah, I love that. Wild dogs, teach me a few of your words before I die. Ah, I wasn't sure. Should I put this things as it is, under a environmental rubric of, we'll talk about environmental issues shortly, or should this be under spiritual awakening? And what's the difference, right?
What's the difference?
Wild
Indeed, I was
dogs,
about to ask you.
teach me a few words. Teach me your words before I die. That's so great.
I want to wake up. I think that the desire to wake up is,
Mm,
I think it can come to anyone really. I don't know why. I wrote a poem about why do I have this urge to wake up? I don't know.
mm, mm.
Don't know. Some people have it.
Maybe it's a basic urge of humanity, right?
I wish it
To
were.
realize that self and other are not two. Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
politics these days, I wish that were more in people's foremost in people's minds.
They claim they're not two, but they claim they're two, but they're not.
Right.
Even that. Yeah, you've got a poem called "Clouds and Water," and I just want to read the very last few lines of that, if I might. It's several
Please.
pages long. Whether slumming in the ghost lands of memory or striving for the pure precincts that lie before thinking, I chase an animal I rarely see, though clearly it frequents the pond. Sometimes when I kneel to drink where it drank, its face looks back at me. What is this in reference to?
I guess it's a desire for a response or proof that the quest is answerable in some way. That elusive animal is it takes many forms. An elusive animal is just one of them. That's not a very clear answer.
That's perfect, though. Not clear is good. Yeah. You know what it reminded me of actually was the famous Dongshan. When he looked in the water and he saw his face, he was awakened and he was looking right into his original face, right?
Mm.
And that's what he saw.
I'd
That
like to
feels
see that today.
what you've seen. Clouds and water. Many of these are from things as it is, and some of them are from horses where answers should have been. So horses where answers should have been.
The
And by
answers.
the way, Glenn Hyunga, I think, did this illustration. You probably all have seen this illustration. It's wild. It's really
I love
good.
it. You know, when I sent them the manuscript and they sent me a Grand Hyunga image of a horse. And of course, the title is Horses Where the Answers Should Have Been. And the last thing I wanted was a horse, a literal meaning. So they said, okay, how about this one instead? And I just loved it.
Nice.
It's kind of scary. It's male. I like the way he's drawn the foot and then corrected it and left the old foot that he didn't keep on the page. It's a kind of spooky male ghost animal, and I think it's very powerful. Yeah. I like his work a lot.
Well, you write about animal spirits and spirit animals, and you said that you growing up in the Adirondacks, you were a girl with dog's blood, right? So
yes, I definitely felt more like an animal than a human child.
Can we read one more poem in Nothing?
Sure.
That's kind of fun.
Thank you for putting the page numbers on. Otherwise, I'd be blundering around. Nothing. This was a conversation that happened in precepts training. My teacher asked me if I could accept practice without realization. It's a very direct question, but I had no answer. I thought of writing on water, writing on wind, writing with white on white. He asked me what was stopping me from realizing the true nature of myself. I said, nothing. He said, uh-oh, better be careful.
Nothing, yeah, the true nature of self. Yeah, that's great. There's some playfulness in that, which is nice to play with the universe, right? Just a little bit.
Absolutely. Life without humor is dull indeed.
That's the definition of dull.
It reminds me of a really funny Mark Twain quote I just came across. This is not really apropos of what we're talking about, but it kind of is. He said, reading, let's see if I get it. Did I write it down? Wait a sec. I'm going to get it right. Oh, yeah, here it is. War talk by men who have been in war is always interesting, whereas moon talk by a poet who has never been in the moon is likely to be dull.
Speaking of moon and earth and sun and stars, you've said that all of your poetry is an elegy to the earth. And you've got so many poems about, frankly, the destruction of the earth, which we're obviously all painfully aware of.
The last great wilderness east of the Rockies, the Adirondack Park, and which is 6.5 million acres of wilderness, with little towns scattered here and there, but no major cities.
Yeah.
And that was my world from the time I was a little teeny kid. And everything else seems to have been damaged. And now it too is damaged beyond repair.
In what way? What's going on in the Adirondack?
I mean, acid rain has decimated many of the tree species. And the pressure of tourism is really tough. It's trails that you hardly could find when I was a kid are now like highways. And there's trash everywhere. I mean, it's still really beautiful. It's still wonderful. But if you're really intimate with a place, you can see its distress if you look closely. I have people come and stay with me and say, oh, this is so beautiful. Look at all these trees. And I look at them and I think, yeah, the beaches are looking a little rusty and the red pines are clearly ailing. And I can see this, the birch leaves are blistering. To the untrained eye, it just looks like beautiful scenery. But if you're intimate with it, you can see the damage. It's pretty unavoidable.
Mm. Well, how about Earth without humans? Let's posit that.
Veer into environmentalism. Okay. Earth without humans. A guy on the street asked me if I could imagine Earth with no human beings. I replied that for 20 years I've been unable to imagine anything else. Having imagined it, where am I now? Do I have clear coordinates? Could a satellite find me? A dog could find me.
There's something just kind of deeply satisfying in a dog being able to find us,
When a satellite can't. I would trust a dog more than a satellite.
How is Rebus doing below your feet? I notice he's not making any noise now.
Out. Poetry bores him silly.
He's writing poetry about you, and you write poetry about him.
What John is referring to is my dog was making a lot of noise before, trying to get my attention, and now he has stopped.
The world it was. It talks about you as a kid, meeting the earth, the things of the earth.
Yep, another Earth elegy. The world it was.
This is actually part of a new transcript or manuscript, which will be published by Copper Canyon Press next year, right?
Yes.
Congratulations.
And this is actually the title poem. The book is called The World It Was. I was a kid transfixed by the endlessly mutating, gloomy rooms among the trees, and I wandered far. At 17, I married thunder and wind and snow. I took vows. I pledged to be only half human, so only half guilty of our crimes against Earth and all its beings. Wherever I am, I visit Earth's memorial. Sometimes I leave a few words in the dirt on a car. The memorial surrounds us. Earth's body is its grave.
For some reason, I leave a few words, written on the dirt of the car. That image has followed me ever since I read it. Is there a backstory to this poem? Is there anything?
Not really. Not really. It came out of the ether, the way most of them do.
Which it's kind of an interesting thing when you talk about poetry. You talk about writing a poetry, you having been a professor of poetry and also obviously a publisher of poetry. So you're very finely tuned to other people's poetry. But you talk about it as when you find the right line, it's almost like a little bit of awakening. It's almost like a little bit of enlightenment.
I think that's right. I wouldn't have put it that way, but you're right. Because it seems, calling it enlightenment seems rather grand. But it is similar in that when you're writing a poem, well, when I'm writing a poem, I should say, I don't speak for all poets, obviously. But I start in the dark. I don't know where I'm going. And you have to be able to tolerate that. You have to be able to not know where you're going in order to get there. And what I've found over the years is that the questions are much harder to come up with than the answers. Anybody can sit down and say what they think about something or what they feel about something. But what's the underlying question? That's the thing that's really hard to locate. And so when I work on a draft now, I start just spilling stuff out and not worrying too much about where it's going. And somehow the language itself begins to talk back to me. And it will say, I'm important. This is an image with a spark in it. I want to stay in the poem. And it makes it easy to cut a lot of stuff out. I do really brutal cutting. And it takes me a really, really long time to get to the first draft. And by the first draft, I mean the first structure for the poem where I can see how it's going to work. I can see what kind of machine I'm building. And then once I have that, it's just a matter of fine-tuning, revision, cutting, etc. So it is, in a way, it very much is like Zazen, where there's nothing and then there's something.
Nothing and then there's something. Yeah, I guess, you're talking about, in some ways, about not knowing, and about, having this willingness to sort of step out and have the heart of the poem come to you.
It has to do.
Is that the process?
Yeah, a lot of it has to do with the intellect and sidestepping the intellect, sidestepping logic and rationality and so forth, which we're all trained to think with. We're praised from the time we're probably in second grade for expressing abstract thoughts clearly. And that gets in the way of writing poems. Writing poems, you have to be able to go where logic can't go. You have to be willing to be inarticulate, to be in a state of not knowing. It's like what Keats called negative capability. To be in a state of, I think I have that quote here. Wait, let me get it exactly. Where are you, Keats? Oh yeah. His definition of negative capability was when a man is capable of being in uncertainties, mysteries, doubts, without any irritable reaching after fact and reason. That's the kind of mind, I think, that allows the door of the poem to swing open and let you in. Valerie said, is it Valerie? I'm getting my quotes mixed up here. Might have been Cézanne, who said, the moment I start thinking, all is lost.
It sounds very much like koan work.
Doesn't it?
Yeah. Well, let's do a koan, and it's called a barred owl.
Okay. This is called Who Cooks for You, which some people say is what the barred owl is saying. Who cooks for you? One night we heard barred owls very close. Hoo-hoo, 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 hoo-hoo. Who cooks for you? Who cooks for you? Local lore says bears can sound like that, but that's untrue. It is true that they have a wide range of vocalizations, but they don't hoot. People sometimes mistake their call for faraway dogs. I sang, hoo-hoo, hoo-hoo, and a bird answered me, territorial. We humans sat out on the porch, imagining his brown ring face, his decision to choose this place for his home and defend it. Barred owls stay their whole lives in one place. In this case, a last scrap of wilderness. They can live into their 20s. Who cooks for you? Who cooks for you? Whoever translated that from owl into English missed it entirely. We hear them often here in the far northern night. They're not talking about cooking. When it gets dark, they try again to reach us, reasoning, rebuking, beseeching. Woo-hoo, 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 woo-hoo. That was funny.
So, Chase, who cooks for you?
I do.
Yeah. Who am I? So you grew up in the Adirondacks as a young girl, and you loved horses. You were around the horse stall an awful lot, and I don't know if that has any meaning outside of there were some unsavory characters running around.
Always hanging around barns.
Yeah, and it's kind of tough for me to ask you to read a poem on this and the abuse that you suffered as a young lady. Marie Howe, I don't know if she's on this call, but she's also written about this, and I don't know. It's just so sad, but it's also to be witnessed as part of life, and we'll try to do something about it. But could you read The Hill Towns of Connecticut?
I will. And I just wanted to say, I wrote quite a few poems about my abuse as a child before I dared read them in public or publish any of them. And when I finally got brave enough to do it, I gave a reading at a small writers' conference. It was Round Top in Texas. And there were only about 50 people in the audience. And I told them what they were going to hear. And I read the poems for the first time. Wasn't I brave? And afterward, 11 people out of 50 came up to me and said, that happened to me. It happened to my daughter. It happened to my son. It happened to my sister. I was shocked that a fifth of the people in the audience had a similar experience. So I'm not alone. The hill towns of Connecticut. Dust motes fell from the rafters all the way down into hay spiced with manure, molasses in the feed, and always a man, a stable hand, or somebody's friend. Girls and horses in the hill towns of Connecticut. Such freedom, unimaginable now. Bareback, still flat-chested, kid muscles wetting the beasts. We rode through open fields to the hole of shadow at the wood's edge, a tunnel just greening with leaves in still closed infant clusters, though the red buds of the maples were already falling. We tracked wood smoke to someone's secret camp. The wife was bent over the hood. They had a fire going down to coals. The husband met my eyes. He looked sad. He looked away. I almost forgot about that. That and the man who appeared in a dust beam to a daydreaming girl with a curry comb and slow danced her up against the horse, holding her hand against him beneath his hand, saying, how does it feel? Just say out loud how it feels and I'll stop.
This young girls having a voice, just being able to speak, to say no.
Yeah, rough stuff.
So another quadruped, mules, the long bony faces of mules. I love this because this is one of your first memories as a child.
Yeah, they say that children cannot remember their earliest years, but I have 4 or 5 memories that I'm absolutely certain are memories from when I was 2 or 3. And this one dates back to when I was 2. Because when we lived in the place next to the field full of mules, we left when I was 2. So it had to have happened then. The long, bony faces of the mules. In an early memory, the heads of 2 black mules appear out of fog, over a single strand of barbed wire. In another, I stand rattling the crib bar, alone, my bottle on the floor. Who threw it? And what was held up to the long, bony faces of the mules? Why do I desire to see things as they are without me, or claim as my ancestor the mountain hermit in a cave with no distractions, no companion minds? I don't know. Who wants to know? Back in the days when a child could ride her bike 2 miles to school on the first warm morning, sweater arms around her waist, the infant leaves unlocked at last, and not think about anything but words for the hard tires striping the litter of fallen buds, wholly absorbed by the spoilage and mystery. I knew nothing of the fences words make in the mind, or that I would devote the first half of my life to building them and the second to tearing them down.
I like that. I knew nothing of the fences words make in the mind, or that I would devote the first half of my life to building them and then the second to tearing them down. That sounds exactly like the Heart Sutra, right? Walls in the mind, and therefore no fears far beyond the list of
Undiluted
thinking.
thoughts. This is nirvana.
Yeah. Right here is nirvana. Yeah, that's great. You know, another theme. So much of your poetry is about relationships, and certainly in your earlier books, it looked to me that you had a lot of poems about your father. And your later books, you seem to have a lot of poems about your mother. And it sounded like your father was not an easy person necessarily.
Neither one of them. They were both handfuls.
Yeah. So raise your hand if you had a difficult father. But I was really touched by a lot of the poetry about your father and your mother. And I have to say, I asked you to read the poem Maverick about watching TV, because my father always used to come into the TV room and say, "Is there a cowboy on? Is there a cowboy show on?"
He liked
And then
westerns.
he did, and then we would
Yeah.
sit down and we'd watch a cowboy together, and that was probably some of the nicest time that I spent with him. You know,
Yeah.
so how about Maverick?
We were allowed one TV show a week.
Ah.
And I always chose Maverick because I could get my dad to watch it with me. And I think the reason that I wrote the earlier poems are about my father and later ones are about my mother is because my father died a good while, maybe 10 years before my mother died. And so the poems came out as elegies.
Mm.
That's was the sequence. It wasn't because, I don't know, I liked my father better or anything like that. Maverick. And a lot of the lines of this poem are stolen from the theme song of Maverick, which I can still sing, but I'm not going to tonight. Maverick. I spent my one allowed hour per week of television with Dad. Maverick. I'd completely forgotten about the line, smooth as the handle on a gun, though I'd sung all the rest by heart for many years. Still sing when alone. Who is the tall, dark stranger there? Maverick is the name, though I misremembered it as Maverick is his name. Dad corrected papers as we watched. Latin teacher. We liked the riverboats, poker games, and 6-shooters, Natchez to New Orleans. I knew what living on Jackson, Queens meant, and the rank of hands. I wasn't really a tomboy. I didn't want to be a boy. I wanted to not be a girl.
A couple of lines in that poem I just really I love one is smooth as the handle on a gun,
Yeah, I wish I'd written that one.
and the other is I wasn't really a tomboy. I didn't want to be a boy. I wanted to not be a girl. How was that in your child
Good
life?
question. If I ever figure it out, I'll let you know. No, I think because of my early experiences, it was safer to be a boy than a girl.
Uh, you mean the scumbags and that sort of
Scumbags
thing?
childhood, yes.
Wow.
But also, I mean, it was cooler to be a boy. I didn't want to play with dolls. I thought dolls were ridiculous. I wanted to build forts and tree houses and shoot arrows and blow things up. So I think I really did tend toward boyhood when I was a kid. I remember my sister, who was definitely more of a girl than I was, had a bunch of dolls, and one day I persuaded her to let me cut their hair, and I cut all their hair off. Bad boy.
And it wasn't a doll where you could just pull out more hair, right?
No.
Yeah. Well, you also seem to love going off in the woods by yourself. You seem to have done that a lot. And
I did. As a kid, I spent most of my time alone in the woods. I often slept in a tent. I felt more like an animal than a child, really.
kind of got that feel from the long faces of mules,
Yeah.
this desire to be out away by yourself in the woods. Yeah. Yeah.
It
Nice.
seemed like a more level playing field, I guess.
Yeah.
Just the metaphor.
So your father was a teacher. Was he a professor or a high school teacher? Or
high school. He taught at a boys' prep school, and he taught Latin and English and coached the baseball team for 40 years.
Wow. And then your mother, and she seemed like, I don't know, I just finished Crime and Punishment by Fyodor Dostoevsky. So they use these terms, but she seems very high society to me.
I would like to hear you say that. She'd be very happy to hear you say that. Whether it's true or not remains unclear.
But she had this wonderful party when she was getting older. She was in her 80s.
We threw her an 80th birthday party, pulled out all the stops, and it was, she was kind of like an icon of herself that whole evening. And she became the person she wanted to be, the person she wished she were. And that's what the poem is about. It's kind of a portrait of the person she wanted to be, or hoped that other people would see her as. So I read that one.
Yeah, please.
Mom's party. Maria arranged dahlias in a vase Mom thought was too tall for them. The caterers passed tenderloin with horseradish on toast, miniature crab cakes, and asparagus wrapped in prosciutto. Yellow caution tape outlined the doors to the deck. No one fell. The ocean rose and fell. The ladies said, "Isn't it just like Anne to know about a band like this? I must get their name." She was glimpsed among dahlias and lilies, both presence and absence. Most of the guests were octogenarians. They arrived promptly at 5:30 and did not overstay. No one left without having had a word with Anne, silver mermaid, shawled in the last gleaming sea of her element, both presence and absence.
Yeah, a lovely image of your mother with her friends, both presence and absence. One of our friend David Hinton's favorite ways to describe form and emptiness. You know David. You know his work.
I know
Sure.
as a translator, yes.
Yeah,
His
yeah,
wife is also a poet, I believe.
yeah. And he's out with a new book, and it's called Orient, like as in Orient to find your way, not Orient as in East Asia.
Ah.
So very, very touching. It made me think of my mother's passing. Um, and you've got a poem in Things as It Is called Her Ashes. And I get this very, tactile, very heartfelt feel for your mother and your relationship to her. Could you read
This is
that?
a poem about scattering her ashes in the ocean off the coast of Rhode Island where she lived. Her ashes. I touched them, her ashes, when we gathered by the Atlantic's cold green-gray concussions to free her, handful by handful, from the form she had taken in the world. She was silky and gritty and purified. I had to rinse her ghost from my hands. Bye, Mom.
Hi, Mom. Do you dream about your mother at all?
For years I didn't. And just recently, in the last few years, I've started resurrecting both my parents in the dreams.
Mm.
And usually I'm younger. I'm a kid, and they're the parents. It's not in a relationship with the dreams.
They say that relationships with with those who have passed can improve with time, and I can assure you that that's true with my father.
Because you've forgotten all the bad things he did.
I don't know. Maybe things are more fluid than we think they are. And certainly with my mother, and I do have dreams of my mother.
My parents had a terrible marriage, which was destructive to all of our childhoods. I have two sisters also. Right. And so a lot of what gets remembered about them is remembered in the context of their marital warfare. So that colors things.
Yeah. Marriage. And you were married to Russell Banks, the well-known novelist, two times shortlisted for the Pulitzer Prize, many other prizes. He must have been close to Hollywood or whatever, because he had at least 3 of his books made into movies, I think.
Yep, there were 3.
Yeah.
Plus the latest short stories.
Mm-hmm. The latest was "Oh Canada," which is the title of the book is "Foregone," right? Which was
that's right.
One of his last books, and he passed away just about 2 years ago.
2 years ago.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's funny because he was not in the slightest enamored of Hollywood. He thought it was funny and interesting, and he just lucked out. Adam McGoyan, the Canadian director, asked if he could do The Sweet Hereafter, which is about a school bus accident in a small town. And they just had the loveliest relationship. No friction, no competition, no arguing. They kind of cooked it up together. And it was just a great experience. And it was a very un-Hollywood experience, partly because Adam's Canadian and Canada handles these things differently. But, and then Paul Schrader did Affliction. And that was also a wonderful experience for Russell. And Paul, being an independent filmmaker, he didn't have to go through all the Hollywood stuff, all the fundraising and all that they do constantly. And then the funny thing is the books that he really cared about getting made into films never got made. He really hoped that someday Continental Drift would be made into a film. And Jonathan Demme was going to do it at one point. And what's his name? The guy who did Dune. Drawing a blank on his name. Another director.
I can't remember.
It'll pop into my head when it's too late. Anyway, and then Rule of the Bone was another novel of his that he really hoped would get made into a film, and many people have tried to do it, and it's just never happened. But Hollywood is a oh yeah, we're going to do it. It's going to be perfect. And then nothing happens most of the time.
I remember seeing the movie Sweet Hereafter years. I think it came out in early 90s or something. And it's such a touching movie. It's about, and I'm sure many of you folks have heard the story. It's a school bus swerves off the road and crashes through the ice in a pond, and 14 of the 15 school children in the bus drowned, and then the bus driver survives as well. And this small town, I think the book is set in Vermont, but the movie is set in Canada. The small town just really tears itself apart as the lawyers naturally descend and the stories change. And everything comes out, and it's very, very rich and troubling, as it naturally would be also. And Foregone was very interesting too. I just read 3 of these books, The Continental Drift and Foregone. I really recommend Sweet Hereafter and Continental Drift. But Foregone was about it was about a documentarian who, in the last day of his life, he wants to himself make a documentary, which is sort of a confessional to his wife, right?
One of his ex-students is making a documentary about his career as a filmmaker, and that's right. He uses the occasion as a way to tell his wife things that she doesn't know, that he wants her to know before he dies.
Yeah. Let's read, can we read Fat God?
Of course.
This is not yet published, is that correct? This will be out next year?
Yeah, this will be out next year. This is there's a series in the new book of elegies for Russell, and this is one of them. And some of them are sort of funny about Buddhism, because Russell was not a happy camper when his wife became engaged in Zen. And it became a sort of funny element, as you'll see in this poem. The Fat God. Russell gave me a little gold Buddha on a chain. The salesman told him, yes, we have the Fat God. The gift was a peace offering, a small joke, an apology for having verbally paintballed my argument that Buddhism was not a religion since it had no God. Poor Buddha, dangling among my necklaces. I wear him often, little gold lord of my heart. But sometimes he looks out from between my breasts and sees no Russell, so I have to take him off again.
The Fat God. Yeah, I guess he thought you were joining like a cult, as if it's not a cult. I don't know if it was a cult or not. But what was his objections to,
staunch atheist,
doing Zen?
Atheist, and he had a wife, an ex-wife, who became a rainbow person. Do you know who they are? They're a group of old hippies, basically, who convene once a year at some national park or other, and totally trash the national park. It's like 2,000, 3,000, 5,000 people camping all at once. And she became a rainbow person, lived in a teepee, and I think he had flashbacks. He was afraid I was going to go a similar route, which was ridiculous, of course. The whole idea that Zen would be comparable to taking a lot of drugs and living in a teepee is comical to me. But I guess it was threatening to him briefly until he figured out that it was going to be okay.
Teepees are great. Yours?
Yeah, I bought one myself.
Yeah. Now he's from South Boston. Is he? He's Boston Irish, isn't he?
From New Hampshire.
Oh, okay.
From New Hampshire.
He's like Irish, and he had kind of a tough upbringing, did he? Or
yeah, he had a very tough upbringing. Brutal father. Actually, both his parents were pretty hard on the kids, and he grew up dirt poor, no electricity, no running water in his childhood, and his father abandoned the family when he was 12 and said, "Okay, son, it's up to you now." And he had 3 siblings, one of whom later died. And he said, "Okay, you're the man of the house." take care of everything. And so Russell, from a very early age, had huge responsibility. And how he became the writer that he became is kind of a miracle.
What were his sources of inspiration?
Well, I would have to say that his main subject was fathers and sons. He worked on that his whole life, even in his final novel. Next to final novel, Foregone is the next to final one. There's one after that called American Spirits, which is 3 novellas, also set in the North Country. But I think that his work was, the ground zero for his work was the relationship between fathers and sons. And although that tree had many branches, that was the root. There's a mixed metaphor for you.
Did you just in a working relationship, did you trade poems with him and he trade writing? Did you comment, or did you have your own firewall of independence?
Both. We always had separate workspaces. In one house, he had a separate cabin. In our place in the Adirondacks, he had a cabin that he would walk over to. It was a couple hundred yards from the house. And he would just disappear. And even when we were in the same house, we had always had separate studies. And he usually get up really early and I wouldn't. So sometimes I wouldn't even see him till dinner time, even though we were in the same house. And we worked strictly separately and never showed anything to each other that was still in progress. We would wait until something was pretty much finished enough so that you would send it out for publication, but wanted a double, a second guess on it, somebody to do a double take on the work. And so we were both, I think, really useful to each other. I think one of the most useful things a reader can be is a shit detector. And if you're married to somebody, you can spot it really fast. And so if I read his work and I found a line that just didn't ring true, I could point it out and he would recognize that. And the same thing with me. There would be something that was just off, or a bit of vanity, or a bit of carrying on too long when enough had already been said. He was a genius at pointing those things out. And he was a really, really useful critic for me. And I have a few friends, very few. I don't show my poems to a lot of people, but I have 3 or 4 people whose judgment I really trust. And I show them work, and it's invaluable to have feedback from people who are well-read and smart and know what you're trying to do and are brave enough to tell you the truth. That's the important part.
How about poems of his passing, the second year?
Okay. These are all from that sequence of elegies. The second year. For a year, I felt nothing. Spasms of tears, then again nothing. I sent his scarves to one daughter, the fox painting to another. Changed all the downstairs paint colors, put the martini glasses out of sight. The second year looked back on the first and saw a widow.
The second year looked back on the first and saw a widow. So it sounds like it really took time for you to realize that you were a widow.
Yeah, it took a long time to register that he was no longer in the world. It's a strange thing when someone just disappears. And there's not really an adequate vocabulary for mourning, I don't think. We have to make it up anew each time. seems.
Hmm. And writing these poems, is this helpful to you in
It is helpful.
understanding its passing?
It took me a really long time to get started on them, over a year. And then it was a year of false starts, a year of trying to write about it, but failing. And then all of a sudden it was as if the door opened, and I guess I was able to feel the grief more fully, and that allowed me to express it. I guess everybody processes grief differently. And for a long time, I thought, this is weird. I don't feel very much. Shouldn't I be tearing out my hair and weeping wildly and so forth? And I was kind of numb for a long time. And I don't think that's unusual, really. But it was hard to write in that state, to write out of a state of numbness.
Mm.
So.
And you also, you took ill for, you had, you caught a virus that
actually,
really
I've had that
health.
for 7 years.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's called myalgic encephalomyelitis, which is the fancy name for chronic fatigue. Mm. And trust me, fatigue is the least of it. I think long COVID is turning out to be the same thing. Mm-hmm. It causes all kinds of bizarre symptoms.
Mm. Well, I hope your health is getting better with time.
So do I. I don't think there's much hope, but I'm doing okay. Thank you for asking.
You wrote a poem where you said before you were middle-aged, and you went through the poem, and then you ended up an older woman, right? And
I really aged about
quality of transition.
Yeah, I aged about 10 years in 1 year.
Mm.
It was quite dramatic.
Just physically, you just felt all that.
Yeah. And it causes weird things like blood pressure fluctuations. Mm. So it's called orthostatic hypotension, where if I stand up after sitting or lying down, I'll pass right out if I don't put my head down. They don't know why, and they can't fix it. So I'll be celebrating 7 years of that state in July.
So his absence, maybe a final poem before we take some questions.
It's funny that that you picked this one and the other one, because it's the only two poems that martini glasses appear in.
And I asked you in the green room about martini glasses. What are you doing with all your martini glasses?
I'm pawning them off on people. He had a big collection. I used to give him at least one or two a year, birthday and Christmas. He has many very exotic martini glasses, which his friends always loved. And they make me sad, so I'm quite happy to give them to people in his memory. Mm-hmm. His absence. Mm. No martini glasses in sight. No secret ashtrays. I can't ask him anything. Locked in a dark library, all that he knew and remembered is lost to us both. And the whole world of the night has gone missing, including the scent of our joy.
All that he knew and remembered is lost to us both. I can feel that, with a close friend or somebody with tremendous experience, and of which you've enjoyed their presence for so many years, and then when you may lose that. Yeah.
And it's strange with his illness. It causes memory problems. And I realize, as I'm aware of not being able to remember things that I used to remember, that every person is a repository of all that they remember and know. And when they die, it all just disappears. So there's this constant accumulation of mental history and associations and all that stuff, and it just disappears. If you don't write it down, if you don't make a record of it, and who does? Very few people. So it's just strange to think that what occupied me all during these years both with and without Russell, is just going to vanish into nothing. In a way, it's liberating. You can't hold on to it, right? So, in a way, it's kind of, I feel a slight elation at being able to let it go.
Mm.
I don't know if that's wisdom or idiocy, but could be both.
Yeah. Which is the summation of life, right?
Right.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, that's wonderful. Let's see if there are any questions
Yeah, I'm happy to
here.
take questions if anybody has any.
So let me see, Dan Kaplan. How does a poem or the start of one come to you, or a start of rumbling in you to flesh out a poem? In other words, what's the source of your poems? What does it feel like as
Well,
a
I
poem is coming
talked about
out?
a little bit already that I think that if you're a poet for a long time, your brain becomes a kind of scanner, and you're always looking for things that you can use. And I have notebooks that I keep with scraps in them. I have one that's called The Orphanage, and that's where little bits and pieces of poems that I've cut go to live. I still like them, and I hope that someday maybe another poem will come along and adopt them. It almost never happens, but that's one. And then I have another notebook called The Compost, which is just things that I might be able to use someday that maybe they'll percolate there for a while and then turn into something. That doesn't happen very often either. But it makes me feel like I'm working when I can write things down. But really, where poems come from is an internal pressure that is really hard to pin down. But I feel it building in me that something needs to come out, and it makes me uncomfortable to feel that way. So I sit down and let my mind roam over a piece of blank paper and see what happens. But it doesn't have to do with talent. One thing I've learned from teaching all these years, I taught for 50 years, is that talent, it's not common, but it's not rare. What's rare is the weird drive that some people have to keep doing this crazy thing of finding language that goes where language can't go, that finds language that's like a net that captures things that can't be exactly paraphrased. And that's where the whole intellect is enemy idea comes in, that you can't think your way through the writing of a poem. It requires a different kind of mind. And I think that kids know this instinctually. I love teaching little kids, like 5th, 6th, 7th grade, 5th grade. For some reason, they're particularly swollen with poems at that age. And I could quote you some kid poems, but if you're interested. But where children's poems come from is such a pure and magical place that I hope that mine can come from a similar source if I can get back to it, if I can just drop that the kind of mind that wants to organize and categorize everything and get around it somehow.
Another question: are you ever tempted to return to painting? Susan asked. Do the colors and forms speak to you?
Yes. And I try and fail. If I could go back to painting the way I did in 8th grade, I would be thrilled. But I can't. I simply don't have that. I've studied art too much in my life and spent too much time looking at things. Everything is dying on me. Wait a minute. Sorry. Electronic failure here. I forget where I was going with that.
Working with things, you're not going to go back to art because
right.
it's just
but
too much.
I do try. About once or twice a year, I'll get out. I have art supplies in the house. I have watercolors and I have acrylics and books that I can write as sketchbooks that I can write in. And I'm never happy with what I do. But what I do like to do is craft kind of painting. I paint furniture. I paint a lot of furniture, including designs on it. And I like to make things. I do a lot of sewing, and I like to make things like birdhouses. And so I kind of get my painting action from that kind of thing.
Do you feel like in the fine arts that the creative impulse is the same as in writing poetry?
I don't know, because the only one I've ever really experienced on a profound level is the making of poems. I do know that when I'm in the middle of painting something, or as I remember it, especially from when I was younger, more almost than the attempts that I've made when I've been an adult, there is a kind of what Elizabeth Bishop called perfectly useless, self-forgetful what did she say? A perfectly useless, self-forgetful. Maybe somebody can help me here. I'm forgetting the quote. It's a famous Elizabeth Bishop. Perfectly self-forgetful concentration. I think that was the word. Concentration. And it's, you do forget yourself. You forget. You forget yourself. You are not identified with the voice that is speaking, either in paint or in words. And it's not a constant state. It comes and goes. Little glimpses. I think the Zazen is the same way, at least in my experience. I haven't suddenly become enlightened. I get a little flash now and again if I'm lucky. But in writing poems, it's the same thing. Every once in a while, something will happen and you go, yes, I recognize that. That's right. Or that's almost right. If I tweak it this way, then it will be right. That's the revision process.
Yeah. Forget the self, forgetting yourself. So it doesn't sound like you're selling paintings commercially. So you don't have.
No, heavens no.
Okay.
Heavens no. If I'd been smarter, I might have been making money on my art, but instead I'm a poet.
Okay. Well, we're glad you are as well. We're glad you are. So Ben asks, the poem title, Bad Movie, Bad Audience, caught my attention. The last line could be instruction for practice, both on and off the cushion, especially for the best student.
Well, I could read that so that people understood the question. Should I?
Sure.
Okay. Let me just find it here. Okay. I've always loved going to the movies alone. And partly I go because I like to watch junky things that maybe other people don't want to watch. And this poem comes out of that solo movie attendance. Bad movie, bad audience. Matinees are the best time for bad movies. Squad cars spewing orange flame, the telephone dead in the babysitter's hand. Glinting with knives and missiles, men stalk through the double wilderness of sex and war, all through the eerie fictions of the afternoon. The audience is restless, a wicked ocean roughing up its boats. It makes a noise I seem to need. The ruby bracelet clinks against the handcuff. All the cars make squealing sounds. The kid in front of me wants more candy, rocks in her velvet seat. Shut up, says her mother, maybe 17. Just shut the fuck up. The corpses of the future drift across the galaxy with nothing in their stiff, irradiated hands. In our ears, the turbo revs, the cheekbone cracks, a stocking slithers to the floor. Cocteau said, film is death at work. Out of the twilight, a small voice hisses, shut up, just shut the fuck up. And you think that's like Zazen, huh?
We'll need more explanation from Ben. So what years was Chase there? I'm not sure what there means. ZMM? No?
Zen Mountain Monastery.
Oh, okay.
I became a formal student in 1996. I've never lived there as a resident. Oh, somebody asked me, maybe it was you, John, before, how many people are there. And it's there are about a dozen full-time monastics, and then maybe 40 or 50 residents who are there for 1, 2, or 3 months, and then a lot of visitors in and out. So
I lived there for 3 years.
Oh, you did? Who's talking?
Miss Louisa. I was there 1986 to 89. I
just missed you.
I just sent you an email on your website.
Oh, thanks. Good.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for this evening.
Oh, thank you for coming. But I used to go a lot. I have not been able to go much at all in the last 7 years because of my illness. There's just no way I could go through session.
Another statement, a quote from Maverick, from Daniel. My old pappy used to say, expect people to be exactly as they are, end quote. There you go.
That's good.
That's a good Zen quote. So Dune was directed by Denis Villeneuve. Thank you.
That's right.
Yeah, thank you, Susan. And Libby, enjoy your warmth and openness. Thank you. Thank you, Libby, for coming by.
Thank you.
Has a poem in revision become a totally different poem?
Always. They almost never resemble the first draft, the early drafts. I guess everybody works differently, and I know there's some poets who work in their heads, and when they sit down and finally put words to paper, it comes out something close to coherent. Mine don't. Mine are completely incoherent. I have to kind of bushwhack through to find out what it is I'm writing about. So, but there's no right way or wrong way. I'm always curious to find out from other people how they work. And it's so interesting. Donald Justice was one of my teachers, and he told me a funny story about Mark Strand, the poet. Don went to visit Mark, and Mark was sitting at his typewriter. They had typewriters back then. And Don said, "What are you doing?" And Mark said, "My lines have become so short and tight-assed that I'm trying to relax the meter and let them run a little bit and make them longer." Years go by, a year goes by, same situation. Don goes back and he says, "What are you doing?" And Mark says, "My lines have become really slack and long and I've got to tighten them up." And he was going back in the other direction a year later. And I think that's very common among poets. You work towards something, and when you achieve it, then there's no point in continuing to do it. You have to figure out how to do something else, or else you're just repeating yourself. So it's the horizon keeps moving away. It's like when your father's teaching you how to swim, and he's saying, "You're almost there, as he moves back farther and farther away in the pool, so that you have to swim to catch up. That's what it feels like writing poems for me.
Nice. Do you see any similarities, differences? Mary Oliver, do you feel any kinship with Mary Oliver?
Yes and no. I'm a lover of nature, and I really appreciate some of her descriptions. I think they're meticulous and elegant. But I'm not, to be honest, a huge fan of her work. There's a softness in it, a sort of reverential softness that I think limits finally the power of those poems. Maybe she's just a nicer person than I am. But I find they have a kind of veneer of niceness on them that makes me want to scrape them.
Very good, Professor. Thank you for putting a painting with words, Sam said, BA. So, Chase, thank you so much for coming. This has just been
my pleasure.
Such a lovely evening, and I've really enjoyed over the last weeks just spending so much time with your poetry and reading and rereading it,
Well, thank you
I
very much.
I really appreciate the confluence for you of your Zen practice and your poetry. It's something that not a lot of poets, even like Gary Snyder or Jane Hirschfield, who I love and know, it's not something that they're quite as out front about. And you're very much, you bring your whole Zen practice right into your poetry, which I
Well, I
respect.
try to do that. I think Zen changes the mind, and the mind is reflected in poems. So I don't see how it could be otherwise, really.
Mm, nice, nice. Well, thank you, and thank you all
Thank
for
you very much.
coming. Yeah.
Yes, thanks, everybody. I appreciate your being here.
Bye now.
Bye.